Hi, I'm Andrea Lee with Core Vision Financial Group. Welcome to another video on financial topics. To make sure that you don't miss any of our videos, make sure that you go to YouTube and subscribe to our page. Today's topic is going to be on financial literacy, and Brett Rice is going to give us some info on that today. Welcome, Brett.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's really your show, so just filling in.
Yeah, you get to fill in as host. I love it.
I know. I don't.
I thought you volunteered for this.
I did. That's because I like you, not necessarily because I'm good at this.
You do a fantastic job.
Well, thanks. All right. So today, financial literacy. What are you going to teach us?
We were having some brainstorming things where we were talking about, hey, what, video series could we do? What stuff did we talked about? We talked about financial literacy, like words of the month or day or week or whatever. And that got me thinking, a lot of people talk about, we aren't taught financial literacy in schools, right? That I think historically that's been taught by families.
Right.
And I think that over time, right, that gets washed out, right? People over time, financial things become more and more complicated.
They do. And I think, too, to that point, it also puts a divide. Because if you're in a household that does talk about it versus somebody who's not, it kind of creates a gap, right?
100%. I agree with that totally. That's kind of actually where I was going with the conversation is it gets washed out over time. So after 2 or 3, 4 generations, your exposure to financial literacy and to financial topics and learning how things work just gets washed out to the point to where you're unfamiliar with it. So then you're, intimidated by it or, those type of things to where you're afraid to ask questions about it. You're afraid to go talk to a bank and those type of things. So what we talked about was let's put together some stuff and talk about some of those things so we can help educate people and say, hey, here's all these topics that build what we consider financial literacy and let's talk about them, and maybe have some good conversations about them and get some people educated on what's going on with stuff.
Right. No bad questions.
Right.
And, you also make a good point. I think so many times people are scared of just finance in general because it seems like the scary thing. But A, it's not. But B, that's kind of how most people are with most things. If it's something you're not familiar with, it's a scary space. And so I'm guessing the goal is to kind of give a little bit of knowledge so that's not a scary space.
Right. Just give people some, basic understanding of how some of these financial topics work and some of these tools that are used for that so they can feel a little more confident talking to people about it and, looking into it. So one of the things, we're going to start kind of, I think, pretty basic and work up to some more complicated topics, like start at basic budgeting techniques and work to retirement planning, life insurance, work up to some of these topics that are a little more complicated.
Sure.
So
you are the king of budgeting.
I have a budget spreadsheet that I like to look at. I don't know if I'm the king of budgeting, but
I feel like you very much enjoy budgeting.
I enjoy building.
You would be who I would go to if I had budget questions. So.
And something you talked about a second ago, and something you and I say to each other all the time is you don't know what you don't know.
Nope.
Right? So we can help fix that by, these videos are, potentially going to be on YouTube forever. So anybody could go to them anytime and say, hey, I'm thinking about buying some life insurance. What's, we've had Brent on the podcast before talk about life insurance. We're going to talk about it a little bit here. So I think, we're really building a resource to where people can go to and say, hey, there's a library of videos. Let's see what's in there.
Right. And it's a no judgment space also, right? Like whatever you're interested, watch it. If you hate it, then just stop it.
And right, you can be more confident going in to watch it because you're not asking a person questions.
Right.
You're just listening to somebody talk about it.
And it might be a good thing if you are going into a meeting and you want to kind of prep, what should I even ask? Yeah. That'd be a great space to start, right? To kind of familiarize yourself with knowing what you don't know.
And I think that's one of the great things about YouTube is it's become this resource of so many topics. Anytime I want to know something or I'm like, ooh, I'm not exactly sure how to sew a button on a shirt, you can YouTube that and there will be, practically hundreds of videos that come up.
Yeah, because I like to see it. And
right.
Yeah, absolutely. YouTube's a great source.
So one of the things we're hoping to do is build a bunch of episodes out of this video series and
Okay.
kind of be able to build people's knowledge base and say, all right, what are common budgeting techniques?
Okay.
So when we get into that, there's a lot of different schools. So let me take one step back. Let's talk about what makes up financial literacy. As far as in my mind, in the research I did when we put this together, we want to talk about budgeting and money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you budget? Why do you budget, right? I mean, we're going to have unplanned things pop up, so, well, how do you budget for that?
Right.
And you just start walking through all these topics
Right.
and all those questions.
Because then those things aren't so bad, right? If you've planned for them.
Correct. If you have an emergency fund
Mm-hmm.
or a savings account that you're building up that you say, hey, this will help me absorb.
In case that.
Yeah, right. You get a car accident, you have $1,000 deductible. You homeowners insurance, you're gonna have deductibles there. You should have those, things planned and budgeted and in place to say, hey, I've got an emergency savings. We have a bad storm, tree falls on my house, I got to get a new roof.
Right.
My deductible's $2,000. Well, I keep $2,000 in my emergency savings. Okay, that's covered. Now let's get my roof fixed and move on with our life.
Right. It also relieves so much stress, right? Because you're not trying to scramble to figure out how you're going to do that and, eat this week.
Yeah.
Because in the event that it happens, you're covered. So absolutely planning, which is my love. So yeah, I think that's extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And just thinking of those things, right? Because that may be something that you haven't thought of, especially if this is all new to you.
Yeah. That's one thing I think. So having been in the industry for 5 years, most of my life was spent outside the industry. And just talking to people, and I mean, nobody tells you, well, you should have, emergency savings to cover your insurance deductibles, right? Whether it's $1,000 for car, $2,000 for home, or whatever those things are. Because when that happens, the first thing they're like is, okay, we got to pay your deductible. And you're like, I never even thought about that. You're worried
Right.
about getting your house fixed. They're worried about collecting the deductible.
Right.
So, having that in place is something that I think was a big deal to me when, I finally was talking to people about it, or you have an accident. Mm-hmm. I think that's actually what happened is, I think my son had an accident and I'm like, okay, we got to cover the deductible. And then you're like, oh, we should probably be saving for that deductible to have that in there. Mm-hmm. So then you start building that into your budget and stuff. So.
Right. Well, and the one thing that you can absolutely guarantee is bad things are going to happen unexpectedly.
And usually at the worst time.
Right.
So.
Right.
So yeah, we do want to talk about budgeting and money management as well as saving and investing, right? Because that's a big deal, whether it's through your employer-sponsored retirement plan or,
Mm-hmm.
like we said, emergency savings, deductible savings.
Both. I mean,
all of it.
Your money should be working for you. Absolutely.
Yeah. Banking and financial services. How does banking work? How do financial services work? How do all of those things fit in there? Mm-hmm. How does credit card interest rates work? How do the Fed is raising interest rates, prime interest rates? How does that affect the average everyday person? So we're hoping at one point to get into that and talk about why that's such a big deal. Because it is a pretty big deal. We also want to talk about taxes. Like a lot of people don't understand how taxes work, how they're taxed on their income, how they get their all that stuff. So we're hoping to, without getting into it, down into the weeds in a ton of detail, just, hey, how do taxes work?
I'm trying to teach my 11 and 12-year-old that now.
Right,
because
100%.
they'll get like birthday money, right? And then they want to go to the store and they find an item that's the exact amount. And so we're teaching them, well, no, you have to pay taxes.
Right.
So already at 11 and 12, they are not thrilled about Uncle Sam.
Yeah, 100%. We're going to talk about debt management and like how your credit score impacts your interest rate and how the interest accumulates over time. And you get into, I think one of the first things that really shocked me about that is by having a mortgage. And looking at the price of the house versus what you end up paying on a house is a huge deal. And a lot of people look at that and they're like, there's no way I paid X and I'm going to pay Y over 30 years.
But it also snowballs, right? Because if you have bad credit, then you're going to have a worse rate, which means you're going to end up paying more. Right. So kind of, not to say that if you do get yourself in that spot, you can't get out. It's just a lot easier if you never get into that spot in the first place. Right. So if you're young, listen and learn from everyone else's mistakes so that you don't make them yourself.
Yeah, and I'd also like to, at that point, talk about when we talk about the Fed raising and lowering interest rates, what kind of impact that can have on you, and when's it a good time to refinance your house or any long-term loan, to say what impact does that have, or when they go up and hey, I had a 3% rate, now it's at 7. What's that 4% difference make? And you start looking into that, and you can become very knowledgeable and more educated on when's a better time for you to buy or refinance or those things.
Well, and how to take advantage of those rates.
Take advantage of it.
Yep.
That's a good point, because a lot of people keep saying, oh, it's a bad time to buy a house because the interest rate's 7%. That's not necessarily true, because historically rates have been 7% or higher. We just came out of a period where they were very low for a decade. Low. So it's significantly more expensive to buy a house at 7% than it is at 3%.
Absolutely.
But it's just understanding that. And I think it's also about understanding that, but taking advantage of when that rate drops to 5.5. Okay, does that make sense to pay the refinancing fee in order to lower your payment? So that's, giving people those tools of amortization schedules and being able to educate themselves and go in there and mess with that stuff and understand that before they go to a bank and say, oh, it's 7% on that house. Okay, maybe that's more than I want to spend monthly. So just understanding that before they go in. Retirement planning is something we want to talk about. Like, I think most people, go through the motion of putting money into a 401k and saving, but do they understand what the expectation should be for when they retire of that money? How much, what's their number?
How to allocate it,
all of that stuff. We want to talk about that to build that up for people so they have a resource to go to that says, hey, I know I can go online and find a compound interest calculator that says if I put $1,000 a month into a retirement savings, what can I expect it to be in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years? And just making people aware of all those tools, because the internet is full of a lot of good tools out there to use for this stuff.
Our website being one of them.
Our website is a great MyBlocks, right? Money Guide Pro, those tools that we use with clients all the time are great resources. I think that a lot of people have been told they need to save for retirement, but they don't know, okay, well, what's my goal then? Do I need to get to $1 million to be able to take that 4%? And then is that $40,000 a year enough for me once I pay taxes on it? Is that going to be enough for me? Okay, maybe my number is now $2 million. But just having that education and understanding how you calculate that yourself, I think puts you in a spot to where you're more informed and better educated on that.
Well, and as it grows, right, then you start to learn what you don't know, and then you start to learn it.
Yeah. But I think one of the biggest points of this, though, is going to be people have to take the time to educate themselves on it. Whether it's watching these videos, downloading a spreadsheet, doing the math and making some of those calculations and doing some of those things.
Hiring an advisor to work with you. Yep.
What a great idea.
Hey.
3 other things we're going to want to talk about is insurance. So we understand the different types of insurance coverage, whether it's health, property and casualty, auto insurance, all those different things.
Umbrella policy. Do I need one?
Umbrella policies. Yeah, I mean, before 5 years ago, I had no idea what an umbrella policy was. And then you look at it and you're like, what a great idea.
I had one because I had a great agent, but I didn't know why. He just said, you need one.
Yeah.
Because we had a pool. Then when we got rid of the pool, he was like, do you want to get rid of it? And then I knew what it was for at that point, and I was like, no, because now I know why I need it.
Right. Financial goal setting. Well, we kind of just talked about that already, but hey, if you have financial goals, whether it's buying a new car, buying a new home, retiring, vacations, vacation homes, how do you do all that stuff? So we want to talk about that to educate people, because I think you see a lot of people, they know they're going to go on vacation, but they don't really plan for it, and they say, well, when it comes time for that, you can use credit cards, take it out of some savings, you can do all these other things. So we're going to talk about the financial goal setting and how we just plan for all of that stuff, right? Get back to your financial planning, right?
Right. Well, and that's the thing. Like, let's say you want to retire at 62. If you're not putting the steps in place to be able to, or you're just hoping, who knows if that's going to happen. And so it's important not to wait until you're 60 to start planning for retirement. If you're there, you still need to start planning now. But the earlier you start, the easier that can be. And it doesn't hurt as bad.
You remember our quote?
Kind of.
A dream without a plan is a wish.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So, the thought behind that is if you don't have a plan for your dream, you're just wishing. You're not taking the action to put that dream in place. And if that dream is, a Florida vacation home when you retire, you better start planning for that as early as you possibly can, because it'll make your ability to achieve that dream, more manageable, I will say.
Right.
And then the last thing we want to talk about is consumer awareness. Consumer rights and protections, scams, stuff stuff that is out there, understanding
I feel
contracts.
like that's a whole series.
Oh, it could be, right? Well, I mean, just look at these topics. Consumer rights and protection, understanding contracts, warranties, and making informed decisions about purchases. And then you throw scams in there on top of it. I mean, that's a lot to take on for a person. Especially somebody who isn't familiar with them at all, right? You very easily could become overwhelmed by those topics. And that's how people become tricked into scams, is the person calling to scam you has more information about it than you do. Mm-hmm. So then
and they're using fear tactics, right?
Yeah, and they start talking to you about stuff, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have no idea about this.
And they're your friend, and they're going to help you out of it.
We're here to help.
Yeah.
We're here to help.
All we need is this amount of money, your credit card number, your social.
And access to your computer.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a pretty broad spectrum of topics that we're hoping to talk about.
But great.
This video series is going to be ongoing for probably a long time, right? And I would assume as we touch on one and then something comes up later, whether it's a new consumer protection law or, interest rates change and all of that stuff happens, we'll want to update these videos and add to them and stuff. So it's probably going to be a living project, I would assume, for a long time to go into the future. So I think that's kind of exciting to give us a bank of information on topics to film.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So.
Well, and I always go back to, if there's something that you want us to cover that we haven't, absolutely reach out, let us know, and we will.
Yeah. And I think there's going to be topics in here that we're not going to cover that later on we're going to say, hey, why don't we walk somebody through the car buying process? Mm-hmm. You go out there and you think, hey, I'm going to pay $30,000 for this car. And by the time you're done, it's like $42,000 because you've added every bell and whistle to it. Just talking about that.
Or your interest rate.
Yes. We talk about good times and bad times to buy things, houses, cars. I mean, car interest rates are higher than they were 2 years ago.
Absolutely. Well, all of them are, but yeah.
So I think just people being educated about that is a great step and a great way for us to provide, value to clients and non-clients of, hey, you know what? Those guys help me understand what an interest rate is and how it impacts my monthly mortgage.
And they weren't scary.
And they weren't scary. And we're not, we're not trying to pressure you into anything. No. We're just trying to provide value and give you a resource for education.
Well, and in all honesty, our community is better the more educated that it is. So
100%.
The more that we can help in every way, I think, is beneficial. So are you going to cover, is this going to kind of be your project?
I don't think it's going to solely be my project. Because while I might be the budgeting guy, I'm probably not the insurance guy. Mm-hmm. Right? Especially when you get to property and casualty. We may have to bring in a local PNC guy and say,
I love that idea.
Hey, talk to us about some of these other ones, debt management. Maybe we bring in somebody who's more familiar with the impact of stuff on credit scores. Right? Just have somebody come in and talk about soft and hard credit inquiries. Mm-hmm. Right? Because one has an impact on your credit score, the other one does not. The amount of times that people check that has, get somebody who's more familiar with all of that stuff and maybe more of an expert on the topic. Going through your credit report, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's entitled to one free credit report a year. Once a year, get that thing and make sure there's, not incorrect accounts. You don't have somebody else's information in yours. Make sure that if there was a debt that went to collections and it was paid off, that it's removed or duly noted on there that it's not there. There's so many things that come along with that. That's a great idea as far as preparedness.
Well, and reading credit card statements, reading your utility bills. The week that you were gone, I was trying, our internet was not the best here, and I was trying to get on my hotspot, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to work. So I went onto my Verizon account on my phone to see if I didn't have it on or something. And while I was on there, I learned that we have an additional phone number that we've been getting charged $20 a month for.
Periodically reviewing those bills to just make sure that they're accurate, because a lot of people are going paperless, right?
Yeah.
And the companies are pushing you that direction, right, to reduce their cost.
And it's less that you have to worry about from a shredding standpoint, so it does keep you more protected. But yeah, just being aware.
That's a great idea.
Learn from my mistakes, Brett.
Well, I mean, right, that we see and hear about a lot more of these mistakes than probably the general public does. So then in turn, turning those around and saying, hey, let's educate people on, the scam thing keeps coming up. I just got an email from my credit card company. They're like, hey, here are the latest scams that are going on. Mm-hmm. So, maybe we start collecting that, and at some point when we talk about that, we're like, the IRS is never going to call you and say,
right,
go buy me a gift card and read me the number.
Right.
Right, you know what I mean? So
they're not going to call you anyway.
Right.
You're lucky if they answer their phone.
That's exactly what I was getting ready to say. You're lucky if they'll answer when you call them.
Yeah.
So, yeah, them calling you is probably a little far-fetched.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm just kind of hoping to use this as an avenue, to help us build our video library while adding value to clients and, providing a resource for, even non-clients out there that are just trying to educate themselves, to make sure they're avoiding some of these financial mistakes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll be honest. I was very blessed. Finance was always something that was talked about growing up. And so when I entered the adult world, I had a pretty good understanding of what needed done, but also I had people in place and advisors that would make sure that I didn't make mistakes.
But you're right. A lot of people don't have that in their homes.
Right. And so just utilizing, if you become aware of this and somebody, a young person in your life that could benefit, just kind of bringing them into the family and letting them know this exists could be very helpful. And maybe save them from making some of those mistakes early on, just due to not knowing what they don't know.
Again, not knowing what you don't know. All right, so I guess just in wrap up, be looking out for additional videos coming that will provide education on some of these financial topics that we kind of briefly talked about here. That, like Andrea said, if you have a suggestion, feel free to reach out. Our contact information will be at the end of this with email addresses and the office phone number and stuff. Always, you can visit our website, corevisionfg.com or weRetirePeople.com. Either one of those websites will take you to Core Vision. So don't hesitate if you think, hey, you guys didn't talk about this. It might be something you want to talk about in the future.
You could even, I think, anonymously drop a note on our website if you were super scared.
info@corevisionfg.com.
Yep.
Will get in contact with us. I think that's about all I wanted to talk about today, really, was just kind of giving a brief overview of what we're planning on. And the first video that we film will be budgeting basics, where we talk about, there's all these different ideas behind budgeting. The 50-30-20, snowball, the Dave Ramsey budgeting. There's so many different budgeting techniques out there. And you get into, debt payoff and savings and all those things. Everybody's got a different... I think the main thing is, I'm going to get on a little budgeting rant here.
Good.
It's what works for you. It's what you're comfortable with. The way I do it may not be the way you want to do it or something you're comfortable with.
Right. Well, and you have to understand it. I'll be completely honest. I know you get your budget. I don't know that I could understand it because you have a lot of moving parts to yours. That probably wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
But you're right. Because you won't stick to it.
Right.
If it's not for you,
100%.
You will not stick to it.
So I've tried to my 22-year-old son, I've said, hey, I created a budget for you. Let's sit down. And he said exactly what you said. I don't understand what you're trying to tell me here. You know, so that version didn't work for him. Mm-hmm. But I think it's an evolution.
Right, absolutely.
Maybe it's on paper. Maybe it's the envelope system through Dave Ramsey. Maybe there's all these.
That's where my husband and I started.
Yeah, that's where I started. Mm-hmm. Right? I went to a financial peace class, came out of there going mind blown that I
was just scared to death.
Just using those envelopes to put cash in. And I was more worried about just having cash sitting in those envelopes, and you had to carry it with you everywhere you went.
I just felt incompetent because I was like, I don't have that, and I don't have that. But I then knew what I needed,
yep.
A, so I knew where to start. And B, it wasn't that bad to get all that in place. I just hadn't done it because I didn't know.
Yeah.
So
I think it's interesting when you go to those classes, you see that light bulb moment just come on where you're like, oh my goodness, yeah. This isn't the big scary beast that I thought it was.
Right.
It allows you to see some light at the end of the tunnel, especially if you have, I'll say, out of control debt, where you're like, oh, there's car payments and mortgages.
Or maybe
and
it
credit
feels out of
cards.
control,
Yeah.
but it's not actually once you get into it. But
Just set somebody next to somebody whose situation is worse than yours.
or can give you a plan
Yeah.
of how to get it done, and then just stick to the plan. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us today. Hopefully you are as excited as we are to kind of cover this financial literacy series. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Anything that you want to end with? You're the closer.
No, just again, like Andrea just touched on, email us. You can call the office. I mean, you can drop a message on our webpage. We're on all the social medias. You know, we have LinkedIn, we have Facebook, we have all of those out there. There's a Core Vision Twitter. We don't have TikTok
You can drop
yet.
a letter in our mailbox.
Yeah, you could actually send us some mail. That'd be great. We don't get very much good mail here, do we? Again, Brett Rice, Andrea Lee, Core Vision Financial Group. Thanks for taking the time to watch our video today. Our contact information will be at the end. Again, go to our YouTube page, subscribe. Be notified when we post new videos, but also feel free to reach out and give us topics that you want us to talk about. You know, we want to talk about stuff that people want to learn about. So, I mean, I think that'd be a big deal, a great opportunity for people to give us some feedback.
Right. Because you're not the only one that has that question.
Right.
100%.
Right.
So
everyone else is just scared to ask it also.
Yep.